tato jaya udiraye nashtaprayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavate uttam shloke bhaktir bhavatir naishtiki Om Agyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukham karoti vachanam pangam langyate girim yat kripatamaham vande Shri Gurudina taranam Paramananda Madhavam. Hare Krishna, thank you once again for joining. So last week we completed the 30th chapter of the third canto, which essentially talked about the fall of the materialistic jiva. And the 31st chapter, which is titled Lord Kapila's instructions on the movements of the living entities. And this essentially continues the description of the future of the jiva that has been described in the previous chapter. So to do a quick recap, in the previous chapter, Lord Kapila had spoken about how one who is materialistic spends their life attached to the body, the family, those that are connected to the body. In order to maintain their family, they perform all kinds of sinful activities, accrue sins. They continue to increase their attachment of the family. And as they grow older, the family begins to stop reciprocating because the person is old and no longer able to earn or provide for the family. So the children who are affectionate now become disrespectful. The wife begins to neglect the husband. But because the husband is so strongly conditioned, he continues to be attached to the family, living with all that disrespect and apeksha and neglect, and becomes more and more miserable. And then with the advancement of age, the body becomes inundated with all kinds of diseases, and the person suffers. And then finally, at the moment of death, the person leaves the body surrounded by family members who are now, for the sake of social etiquette or for the sake of prior attachment, are expressing regret at the imminent passing of the man. And the man passes again deeply attached to the material conditioning. Lord Kapila said, then such a man, because of all the sins that he has performed, is at the time of death is faced by the two agents of Yamraj, the Yamadutas. And the Yamadutas, they give the person a yatna sharir, a gross body that is specially made to withstand high levels of punishment. And in this yatna sharir, depending on the activities that the person has done, he has given various kinds of punishment. He goes to the Tamishra or the Andha-Tamishra, hellish planet, where the agents of Yamraj, they execute all kinds of punishments. And because of the yatna sharir, the person does not die or lose consciousness, but suffers tremendously. This chapter will now talk about the subsequent activities. So at the end of the previous chapter, it was mentioned that such a person, after suffering from prolonged hellish suffering, then begins to transmigrate through the 8.4 million species. So through the law of nature, the karma is no longer working now. Just through the law of nature, the person moves from one form of species to another, until after a very long time, he is ready to take birth in the human form of life. And this chapter now talks about from that point, that the jiva is now ready to take birth in the human form of life. So the chapter has 48 verses, and the general flow of the chapter is that it will begin with a description by Lord Kapila of the growth of the jiva within the womb, and also the suffering of the jiva in the womb, followed by the prayers of the jiva in the womb to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then, once the jiva is born, Lord Kapila will describe the sufferings outside the womb. And then he will finally talk about the effects of bad association and conclude with a philosophical understanding of the cycle of birth and death. So in this way, he will complete the cycle of a conditioned jiva. Okay. Verse 1. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Karmana Deva Netrena Jantur Deho Papatyaye Striya Praveshta Udaram Pumshoreta Kanashraya. The personality of Godhead said, under the supervision of the Supreme Lord and according to the results of his work, the living entity, the soul, is made to enter into the womb of a woman through the particle of male semen to assume a particular type of body. So the Lord uses the word karmana to indicate that this is a birth that is driven by the law of karma. So the soul enters the semen of a man just suitable to become his father. So this is the other aspect of karma, that the child is attracted to the womb of the mother and the semen of the father based on its own karma and its own desires. So one jiva takes birth in an opulent family and the other in a family that is very poor or degraded. They're both human forms of life, but vastly different types of birth. That is because of karma. Children may take birth in the family of a Brahman or in the family of a dacoit. And while the jiva is free to plot its own destiny, but definitely the environment in which it takes birth, the swabhav that it gets, and the nurturing that it gets plays an important part. And these are not coincidental. They are determined by the prior activities of the jiva. So these activities are, so Lord Kapila says, Deva Netrena, that under the supervision of the Lord. So actually it is not under the direct supervision of the Lord, but through his expansions, the demigods, and by the law of karma, which is essentially his way of supervising. So Srila Prabhupada says in the purport that it is said in the Bhagavad Gita that a living entity is wandering in this material world on a chariot made by material nature. This is 1861. Yantrarudhani Mayaya. Then Prabhupada says the Supreme Lord as Super Soul is always present with the individual soul. He directs material nature to supply a particular type of body to the individual soul according to the result of his work, and the material nature supplies it. So this is Daivya Netrena. That ultimately it's by the desire of the Lord, but it is enacted either by the Devas or by the expansion of the Lord as Paramatma. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada also emphasizes that this verse indicates that life comes from life. That it's not the combination of the sperm and the ovum that results in the creation of the life, but it is actually the presence of the jiva in the sperm that is the cause of the life. So he says that the materialists, they are under this mistaken impression that simply by the combination of a particle of semen in a womb, the body develops. And he says that is not possible. That unless there is a soul, the body will not appear. So this verse, of course, talks about the antecedent being the materialistic jiva that Lord Kapila was describing, the one who fell into the Tamishra or under Tamishra and then rose through the various animalistic species to become get this human form of life. But this is also true for the jivas that are descending from the higher species of life. So Krishna says in the 3rd chapter, Bhagavad Gita, that the living entities subsist on food grains, and these grains are produced by rains, and the rains are produced by the yagya, and the yagya is born of prescribed duty. And then later on in the 8th chapter, verse 4, in the purport, he says that in this, when this sacrifice is done, then the piety raises the soul to a higher planet. And when the piety is exhausted, then at that point, that soul falls to the earth in the form of rain. And then the rain becomes the grains are eaten by the man, it transfers into semen, and then impregnates the woman, and the living entity takes the form of a human being again. So both ascending and descending jivas, they come through this cycle of transmigration ultimately through the particle of semen being deposited in the womb of the mother. Verse 2. Kalam tvaika ratrena pancharatrena buddhudam dasanena tu karkandu peshandam va tatah param. On the first night, the sperm and ovum mix, and on the 5th night, the mixture ferments into a bubble. On the 10th night, it develops into a form like a plum. And after that, it gradually turns into a lump of flesh or an egg, as the case may be. So Lord Kapila in the next set of verses will describe the process of growth of the embryo. I've also summarized this in a table, and I sent it to Prem Kishore Prabhu. I was a little late in sending. I just sent it a few minutes ago. But it's there, and in the table, I've also compared it with the conventional medical understanding of the growth of an embryo. And then you can see how the scriptures that were thousands of years old were describing something so accurately that science has only in the last maybe 25, 50 years has begun to understand. So here Lord Kapila says that the body of the soul is, the process of the body of the soul is described in brief. So the embryo, it actually develops in 4 different ways, depending upon the nature of the species. So they are known as udbija. So these are those embryos that fructify from a seed. And these are like trees and plants that sprout from the earth. Then there is swedaja, which is from sweat. So this is the second kind of body that grows from perspiration, as it is with flies and germs and bugs. Then andaj is from eggs, and this is the variety of birds. And jarauj is from sperm and ovum in the womb. It's like the humans and mammals and the higher forms. So the process of development is initially the same for andaj and jarauj. That's why Lord Kapila says that it turns into a lump of flesh or an egg, as the case may be. So later on, it will differentiate. That if it is jarauj, it becomes a lump of flesh. And if it is andaj, then it becomes an egg. So the birds are, that's why known as dvija, because they have 2 births. For once, the embryo, and the second is from the egg. And of course, these series of verses are for the humans. Okay, Prabhupada says that the verse indicates that after emulsification of the ovum and sperm, the body gradually develops either into a lump of flesh or into an egg, as the case may be. In the case of birds, it develops into an egg, and in the case of animals and human beings, it develops into a lump of flesh. Okay, verse 3. Masena tushirudvabhyama bhavangradyanga vigraha nakhalamasti charmani linga chidrodbhavastribihi. In the course of a month, a head is formed, and at the end of 2 months, the hand, feet, and other limbs take shape. By the end of 3 months, the nails, fingers, toes, body hair, bones, and skin appear, as do the organ of generation and the other apertures in the body, namely eyes, nostrils, ears, mouth, and anus. So this verse talks about the further development of the embryo at a period of a month, period of 2 months, and then by the end of 3 months, the body has now begun to take form. There are nails and fingers and toes, the hairs begin to develop. Then the 9 openings in the body have also appeared. Verse 4. Chaturbidhatva sapta panchabhikshudrat udbhavaha shadbirjara vita kukshav brahmyati dakshine. Within 4 months from the date of conception, the 7 essential ingredients of the body, namely chyle, blood, flesh, fat, bone, marrow, and semen, come into existence. At the end of 5 months, hunger and thirst make themselves felt. And at the end of 6 months, the fetus enclosed by the amnion begins to move on the right side of the abdomen. So according to Vedic embryology, that if the child that is developing within the womb of the mother is a male, it moves to the right side of the body, and female moves to the left side. So here Lord Kapila is talking about a male child. So he says begins to move on the right side of the body. Okay, next verse. Matu jagdana panadyera ehadadhaturasmate shete vinmutrayorgarte sajantur jantu sambhave. Deriving its nutrition from the food and drink taken by the mother, the fetus grows and remains in the abominable residence of stool and urine, which is the breeding place of all kinds of worms. So because the embryo is essentially a body within a body, so it needs nourishment, but it has no access to any outside source. So for food and for water, it is completely relying on what the mother takes. And the position of the fetus is such that it is between the in the lower part of the abdomen, which is also the place of residence for the stool and urine, and also the breeding place of all kinds of worms. So worms, we can understand here, is referring to all kinds of bacteria, because we know that the digestive tract of the system actually has billions and billions of bacteria, and they're constantly acting upon the food that is being digested. Prabhupada says that in the Markandeya Purana, it is said that in the intestine of the mother, the umbilical cord, which is known as apyani, joins the mother to the abdomen of the child, and through this passage, the child within the womb accepts the mother's assimilated foodstuff. In this way, the child is fed by the mother's intestine within the womb and grows from day to day. The statement of the Markandeya Purana about the child's situation within the womb is exactly corroborated by modern medical science. And thus the authority of the Puranas cannot be disproved, as is sometimes attempted by the Mayavadi philosophers. So, so brief note about this point Srila Prabhupada makes, that the Mayavadi philosophers, they sometimes try to discredit the Puranas. They say they're just stories or questionable origin, or they are outside the Vedas. That's why in the Tattva Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami, he actually first begins with establishing the importance of the position of the Puranas. He makes many points, but the basic point that he makes is that if you accept the authority of the Vedas, then within the Vedas it is said that you should accept the authority of the Puranas. And then he quotes different verses in the Vedas where the Puranas are glorified, the Puranas are called the fifth Veda. So he says that you cannot selectively accept that. If you accept the Vedas, you accept it in the entirety, including the statement in the Vedas that the Puranas should be accepted as authoritative sources. The reason that the impersonalists try to stay clear of the Puranas is because the nature of the Puranas is different from the Vedas. The Vedas tends to speak in mystical, cryptic language that lends itself to multiple interpretation. The Puranas are descriptive, and they're essentially pastimes. So it is difficult to misinterpret the Puranas. That if somebody was to discuss the pastime of Dhruva Maharaj, it is difficult to come up with any other conclusion than what is conveyed by that pastime. The Dhruva, he had material desires, took the shelter of a spiritual master, followed the instructions, prayed, got personal audience of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, became a devotee, and at the time of leaving his body, he went back to the abode of the Lord. Right? Very difficult to twist any other meanings. So that is the reason that, as a rule, the impersonalists, they do not touch the smritis, with the exception of Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is in the category of smriti, but it is written in a Upanishadic style. That's why it's known as Gita Upanishad. So Gita is an exception, but otherwise they primarily focus on the Upanishads. For instance, Sripad Shankaracharya, he commented on actually 10 Upanishads. He called them the Mukhya Upanishads, which were his own categorization. It's not that they are considered, but 10 Upanishads he commented on, one from the Rig Veda, 2 from the Sam Veda, 3 from the Athar Veda, and 4 from the Yajur Veda. And he said they are the Mukhya Upanishads, but he did not comment on strongly Vaishnav Upanishads like Gopal Tapani Upanishad. He left that by. He did comment on the Isha Upanishad, actually. So this is why Srila Prabhupada says that the authority of the Puranas cannot be disproved, as is sometimes attempted by the Mayavadi philosophers. That because they cannot misinterpret it, they try to disprove the authority per se. So in this, Lord Kapila further states that the mother eats and drinks. He says, Matur Jagadhana Panadayar. And based on that, the fetus, etaha dhatu, based on that, the fetus nourishes itself. So if the mother eats very spicy food, then the embryo has no choice but to nourish itself with the same kind of food and feel the discomfort. So the embryo lives in Vina Mutrayor Garte. Basically, Vin Mutrayor Garte means the same hole through which stool and urine is passed. And then Lord Kapil says that this is asamate. He says this is an abominable situation. So he's talking about the continued trials and tribulations of the jiva. Okay, we'll go to verse 6. Krimi kshat sarvanga shokmarya pratikshanam murcham apnoti uru kleshas tatraye kshuditer muhu. Bitten again and again all over the body by the hungry worms in the abdomen itself, the child suffers terrible agony because of his tenderness. He thus becomes unconscious moment after moment because of the terrible condition. So Prabhupada writes that the miserable life begins from the moment that living entity begins to contact his material body. Unfortunately, we forget this experience and do not take the miseries of birth very seriously. In Bhagavad Gita, therefore, it is specifically mentioned that one should be very alert to understand the specific difficulties of birth and death. So actually, this in the Bhagavad Gita, this is mentioned as one of the one of the 20 items of knowledge. In the 13th chapter from verses 8 to 12, one of the items is Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukha Dosha Anudarshanam. That seeing the Dukha Dosha, seeing the misery and the suffering of Janma Karma, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. That Mrityu Jara Vyadi is death and old age and diseases, and then Janma is birth. That's seeing the suffering of the birth. So while the Jiva may not remember experientially, but through the eyes of the scriptures, the Jivas can very well understand that they have all gone through this suffering. And it's not that this suffering is only in the human form of life. In every form when they have taken birth, the same kind of suffering is there, which is particular to that environment, that species of life in which they have taken. The human form of life is the highest form of life. And in that there is so much suffering. So one can imagine that there will also be similar and more suffering in the other forms of life. Okay. Next verse. Katu Tishno Shalavana Ruksham Labdidir Ulbanehe Matrabhute Upasprashtha Sarvango Tehita Vedanaha. Owing to the mothers eating bitter, pungent foodstuffs, or food which is too salty or too sour, the body of the child incessantly suffers pains which are almost intolerable. So you can imagine that at this situation, the skin of the body has still not developed fully. So in the present situation, like if you have a bruise, then the outer layer of the skin, it is basically damaged. And in that situation, if somebody was to put salt or chili on the bruise, then the pain is very intense. Now extrapolate this, that the bruise is all over the body because the complete skin has still not developed the outer layer. And the fetus is held within the amnion. And when the mother eats pungent or salty food, then it is as if a person has been skinned and has been dropped into a vat of fluid which is salty and spicy and pungent. So one can at this point say that, but this may not happen to everybody. There may be mothers who do not eat pungent foodstuff or salty or sour foodstuff. But the reality is that the tenderness of the child is so acute at this stage that even what is considered to be not salty or not spicy is still a cause of suffering. It would, of course, increase as mothers take more. But even if one says that I will follow a bland food, a diet, the nature of the food itself is intrinsic. Because sometimes we think that by cooking we make the food salty or sour, but actually the intrinsic nature of the food is also that it is salty and sour. And that is what will continue to contribute to the suffering of the child. Prabhupada says that this suffering is beyond our conception of the child. And it is very difficult for the child to remain. So the only not redeeming, but only mitigating factor is that the consciousness of the child is not fully developed. So even though the child is suffering, it does not die. The Prabhupada says that is the benediction of Maya, who endows the suffering body with the qualification for tolerating such terrible torture. So it's almost like when the jiva goes to hell, it gets a yatana sharir, which is more sensitive to punishment, but still it is designed in a way that the jiva does not lose consciousness or die. Similarly, in this case, even though the body is sensitive to suffering, because the child's consciousness is minimally developed, it is mostly latent. So while it is suffering, it does not leave the body. So this also brings forth an interesting point, that the suffering that is experienced is not of the body, but of the mind. And a more empirical analogy of that is that when a patient is taken for surgery and is put under anesthesia, then the surgeon can come and they cut open the body and they do surgical performance, and then they sew the body back. But the patient is just lying. Why? Because the mind has been put to rest at that point. When the effects of the anesthesia wear off, then the person begins to suffer from the residual pain. Now they could not have tolerated the actual pain, but whatever the residual pain is, they suffer. So the point that is made is that the suffering is actually a function, even physical suffering is actually a function of the mind and not of the body. Okay, I'll do one more verse and then after that we can pause for any discussion. Verse 8. Ulbena samvratastasmin antare cha bahiravrataha ashtikritva sirah kuksha bhugnaprastha shirodharaha. Placed within the amnion and covered outside by the intestines, the child remains lying on one side of the abdomen. His head turned towards his belly and his back, and neck arched like a bow. So this is Lord Kapila describing the fetal position of the embryo within the womb. That the child is lying to the side and the head is bent inwards towards the belly, and the neck is bent, arched like a bow. And it is interesting that ultrasounds are relatively modern scientific technology. Maybe they are, I don't know, maybe they're 25 years, 50 years old at the most, in which you can actually see the fetus within the womb. And by that you can understand that, yes, this is how the fetus is lying. But the Bhagavatam is giving such an accurate description thousands of years ago. Srila Prabhupada says that in order to understand the discomfort of the situation, you can imagine that if a grown-up man was put in this situation, that is put into a small container, and the only way that he can fit into there is that he assumes this crouched fetal position. So it would be impossible for the person to live for a very long time. And the fetus, on the other hand, will spend several days in this position. The Prabhupada says that it is an unfortunate civilization in which these matters are not plainly discussed to make people understand the precarious condition of material existence. Okay, so I'll pause here and see if there's any comments.
Just a little clarification in the first verse. There's a line in the purport that is not so clear to me. I'll just read the line. After suffering there, when he who had many types of hellish bodies, like those of dogs and hogs, is to come again to the human form, he is given the chance to take his birth in the same type of body from which he degraded himself from hell. I really don't grapple the understanding of that last part there, that he is given the chance to take his birth in the same type of body from which he degraded himself to hell.
So this is referring to the human form of body.
Yeah.
So if you follow the cycle that Lord Kapila was saying, that from the human form of body, because of the sinful activities, are degraded to hell. And then after going through all this suffering and transmigration, the soul gets the opportunity to take the human form of life again. Because only in the human form of life does karma accrue. So only from that form of life can you fall or rise. In no other form of life is possible. So you're again, after all this cycle, now you're again in that form where you're again given an opportunity to make the choice of rising or falling.
Okay, thank you. One other question or clarification. You mentioned, well, the Bhagavatam says so many worms in the body, and then you referred that to bacteria, whatever, like that. I'm just trying to figure out that if bacteria and viruses, they are living entities, means that if they are individual jivas, like that, because I would assume that worm is a jiva in itself, but then I'm just trying to get, it's bewildering to me that so many bacteria and viruses are there, and we know that plants have life. 8,400,000 species of life. That's clear, but bacteria and viruses, are they individual life forms or what?
That's my understanding, Prabhu, that anything that has these symptoms of life, that it takes birth, grows, remains for some time, produces byproduct, dwindles, and then dies. These are indicative of the presence of life. And bacteria and virus, they all display the same 6 stages. In fact, at one of the lectures that I was hearing, the point was made that not only the bacteria and viruses, but each of the individual cells in the human body have jivas within them. So there is a predominating jiva that is situated in the heart of the person, and the same logic was basically provided, that the cells also, they display these 6 symptoms of life, that they appear and grow, etc., etc. I don't know if there is any, I mean, I didn't ask because this was a recorded lecture, but so I can't be sure about that. But yes, these microscopic creatures, they definitely display symptoms of life.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, my question is on the relations, Prabhuji. Like, we say that somebody is father of so and so, mother of so and so, and as a whole, like when we see, like as a holistically, we can easily say that this person is father of this person. But when we see that, like is this person father of the soul, means like or that soul is father of this person, like that way it is not so clear, Prabhuji, because sometimes if you say body is just matter, and it has nothing to say that he is father or something. And if you take soul also, like we can't say that somebody is father of this soul. So it is only on the subtle body level, like because of our mind, we say that somebody is mind thinks and registers like that, Prabhu. Like how it's easy to say as a whole, like so and so person has this person father, or so and so is mother.
Right. I don't follow your question. I'm sorry, Prabhu.
So father and mother, or even any other relations, they are only on the level of mind, we think, Prabhuji, or it is really onto the body. This person is father of this body or soul, or only because of subtle body. I was not so clear. As a whole, I can say that, like Ravi has this person as a father, and like that. But father to this body, or
So father to the soul, we know doesn't apply, right? Because that this relationship is only predicated on the particular body that has been taken by the soul. And like it's mentioned that in this birth, you have a father, in the next birth you may be the father of that person. So the relationships are only derived from the gross body, deha patyakalatradesh, deha, complete, not even the subtle body. Because when you transmigrate, you go with the subtle body, and with the same subtle body, you will have a different set of relationships. So it is completely predicated on the relationships that are established through the gross body.
sure, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Nandagopal Das, thank you. Thank you for your class. Just want to ask you two questions, but if time permits. One question is that in other religions, they say that the soul, once it reaches human form, does not go down. And they have the evidence of this afterlife, so many afterlife experiences that they have documented, even scientifically, Ian Stevenson, and all of them were previously they were all in the human form, and again they got another human form, just to confirm their own philosophy. They have this. So But Bhagavatam says, or our scripture says, it goes down. The life goes down into different forms and then comes back to the human form. So, is there a way to explain to those others to make sense that the soul gets appropriate punishment for its past karma, which could be even less than the human form, not necessarily the human form, but it could be even less, because if a person kills a cow, then he comes back as a cow and being killed by somebody else. That's one of the things that we have learned in Bhagavad Gita. The picture is there. But the other people, so how to explain? Is there any way that we can logically explain? Have you thought about it? I can't hear you, Prabhu. It's I don't know why.
Sorry, somehow I got muted. Can you hear me now, right? Haribo?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. So this philosophy of reincarnation, transmigration, it is unique to the Vedas. Like no other religion subscribes to it. So, so you were talking about the soul going from one form of God, one species to another. That is predicated on the notion of reincarnation, right? That once the person, once the body dies, the soul takes a new body. Incarnate, basically, carnate is body, carnal related to the body. Incarnate means the person comes in another body. And so they don't accept the notion of reincarnation. They don't accept the notion that other than the human, anybody else has a spirit soul, right? So when you talk about animals, etc., they don't accept that they have souls in them. So it's difficult to explain the whole culpability through reincarnation. That if you do bad things, when you take birth again, you will get a degraded birth, and then you will suffer. And they'll say there's no birth after that. What does Christianity believe? That once you die, you go to the purgatory, and there you stay until the day of judgment. And after that, you either go to heaven or you go to hell, right? So it's basically a linear path with a fork at the end of it. There's no cycles there. I'm not too sure about Islam, but they I'm not sure if they're purgatory or whatever they have, but they don't also subscribe to the notion of reincarnation. So in these cases, the general process of convincing them is through morality. Like PETA is an example, right? They talk about being kind to animals, and PETA is mostly atheistic, but they talk about vegetarianism, veganism, kindness to animals because of morality. That they showcase the suffering that the animals are put through, the hellish conditions that they are brought up in and then slaughtered. They try to show that the animals are sentient. They feel pain, and they have this all these videos of cows running after the calves as the calves are being taken to the slaughterhouse, etc. So that would be the recommended way, to talk more from a platform of compassion, mercy, morality. Because if you talk about reincarnation, it goes against what they accept in the scriptures. So people will say that who knows what happens after death. You don't know, I don't know. You're reading from one book, I'm reading from another book. They're telling different things. I think my book is right, you think your book is right, we don't know which book is right, so let's leave it at that, right? So that's where the discussion will end. If the person is relatively open-minded, sometimes they're not even that open-minded, and they will say that your book is full of superstitions and all kinds of unsubstantiated things. My book talks more logically, and then the discussion goes south from there. So generally speaking about the mode of goodness values, that why harm. We used to do for the Festival of India, we used to do a book stall on vegetarianism, and before we did that, we would go for some training on how to speak to people. And for most of the people, this would be the line we would give, that animals are sentient, they're capable of experiencing love, they're capable of experiencing pain, and they have emotions. There are pictures of tears flowing from the eyes of the cows. There are pictures of elephants that are distressed when their calves are being taken away from them. And that tends to, unless a person is convinced about one particular thing, that does tend to have some effect on people who are a little open-minded.
Thank you, Prabhu. There's one more question, if time permits, I will ask. Otherwise, I will ask later, Prabhu.
Sure, go ahead.
In so far, you have been explaining about the growth of the embryo in the womb. Does the Bhagavatam talks about when does the heart develops in the embryo, or because I didn't hear that one when you were explaining? Is there any other section of the Bhagavatam talks about that?
It does not specifically talk about the heart, but it talks about consciousness. So in the 7th month, it will say that by 7th month, the jiva is fully conscious. And after that, it is ready. It can come out anytime it wants.
Okay, Prabhu, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. So we'll move on to verse 9. Akalpasvanga chesthayam shakuntiva panjare tatra labdha smriti deva karmajan shatodbhavam smaran dirgham anuchvasam sharmakim nama vindate. The child thus remains just like a bird in a cage without freedom of movement. At that time, if the child is fortunate, he can remember all the troubles of his past 100 births, and he grieves wretchedly. What is the possibility of peace of mind in that condition? So at this point, the child is developing understanding or awareness. So Lord Kapila says that labdha smriti daivat. So daivat means by some fortune, if the child is fortunate, which means that not all jivas are given memory of their previous 100 lifetimes. Some get it and some don't. So what is the distinction? It can obviously not be random. So the distinction is essentially the level of advancement of the soul. And we'll see more about this later on, that a soul that has achieved a greater level of advancement is given this opportunity. And what about those who are not given this opportunity? The scriptures are there for them. So in a way, like we are reading the Bhagavatam. So it's a genteel way of reading bad news. Like you read the newspaper in the morning, and in the newspaper it says that in this particular part of the city, a gang of dacoits came and they invaded a house, and they killed the people in the house, they stole the money and went away. And then you basically think, okay, I need to be careful now. I need to make sure my house is well protected, locked, and take all precaution. So even though it hasn't happened to you, but you trust the newspaper that it is happening, so I need to take corrective action. So scriptures are like that, that they give us the benefit of the experience of others. And if we trust the scriptures, it's like if we trust the newspaper, then when we read the article, we will become more careful. So if we trust the scriptures, and then we read the facts enunciated by the scriptures, we will become careful. How will we become careful? Then let us not take birth again. That the Bhagavatam tells us that the jiva is suffering in this abominable situation. So if you're not careful, it will happen to us. Like the person reading the newspaper thinks, if I'm not careful, the dacoits will attack me. So let me be careful. So similarly, a person who's more alert will read the scripture and say, if I'm not careful, this will happen to me. This is also, so one may say that if these experiences are so instrumental in us making improvements in our life, then why does Krishna make us forget? Why aren't we born with all these memories? After all, in this particular life, if we suffer from some pain, we remember it. We carry that memory of that pain with us. So that pain is a lot more. Why does Krishna make us forget? And the answer is that Krishna makes us forget as a favor to us. Because if you look at the big picture, then all the suffering in this material world is because of us. All the enjoyment in this material world is with the blessings of Krishna. So even though we are trying very hard to inflict suffering on us, Krishna is at the same time trying to protect us from our own suffering. And he does, and one might extrapolate it to other extremes, and he does what is best for us. So if we were to be born with the memory of the suffering in the womb, then it would be difficult for us to survive. If we were born with the memory of our 100 previous lifetimes, it would be very, very difficult to survive. So, within the womb, Krishna, he allows certain jivas, and he does not give that just to scare the jiva, because what's the point then, right? That the embryo sees the 100 previous lifetimes, sees all the suffering, and then he forgets. So that's not the intention. The intention is that this becomes a samskar. This becomes a subtle impression. So this is how the jiva's advancement also continues. That when a jiva has advanced to a certain level, then Krishna is helping the jiva continue with that advancement by showing by showing the jiva the dangers of staying on the material path. So when the jiva is born, it may not explicitly remember the 100 jivas, it may not even, or it will not even remember seeing the 100 forms, but the fear that it has developed on witnessing it, that remains. And that will create detachment within the jiva. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, one who does not take heed of these indications of suffering in human existence is said to be undoubtedly committing suicide. It is said that this human form of life is the only means for crossing over the nishayans of Maya or material existence. And then Prabhupada says, we have a very efficient boat in this human form of body, and there is a very expert captain, the spiritual master. The scriptural injunctions are like favorable winds. If you do not cross over the ocean of nishayans, of material existence, in spite of all these facilities, then certainly we are intentionally committing suicide. So he's elaborating on the statement that he made earlier on, that one who does not properly use the human form of life is committing suicide, because in this human form of life, all this is given to us. So this is, of course, Prabhupada is quoting this famous verse from 11th canto, chapter 20, verse 17, where it said the human body is automatically obtained by the laws of nature. It can be compared to a perfectly constructed boat having the spiritual master as the captain and the instructions of the personality of Godhead as the favorable wind. Prabhupada is paraphrased, but essentially making the same point, that one who does not utilize this human form of body is essentially committing suicide. And if you remember in the first canto, first chapter, the sages of Naimisharanya, they also say something very similar to Sutta Goswami, where they say that we have met you by the will of providence, just so that we may accept you as the captain of the ship for those who desire to cross the difficult ocean of Kali. So at least the parallel is in terms of the role of the spiritual master as the captain of the ship, which is the human form of the body. Okay, verse 10. Arbhaya saptamamasa laptabodh pide pitaha Nay katraste sutivate vishtabhur vasodraha. Thus endowed with the development of consciousness from the 7th month after his conception, the child is tossed downward by the airs that press the embryo during the weeks preceding delivery. Like the worms born of the same filthy abdominal cavity, he cannot remain in one place. So by the 7th month, the fetus is fully developed and can now survive on its own outside the body of the mother if needed. And empirically, we see that also, that there are children that are born 7 months, after 7 months of pregnancy, and while they may be a little underweight, but they're fully capable of surviving and then grow up later on. So in preparation to expelling the child, the body of the mother now starts pressing the child down. And so Prabhupada says that the worms have been described as sodar. Sodar means born of the same mother. Since the child is born from the womb of the mother, and the worms are also born of fermentation within the womb of the same mother, under the circumstances, the child and the worms are actually brothers. We are very anxious to establish universal brotherhood among human beings. But we should take into consideration that even the worms are our brothers. What to speak of other living entities? Therefore, we should be concerned about all living entities. So here Prabhupada is essentially making a case for vegetarianism, that universal brotherhood does not mean that only humans are brothers. So the point he's making is that more than somebody who has a human form of life, a worm is probably your closer brother, because born of the same mother. So if one has to be obsessed by bodily conceptions, then one should be more cognizant of this. And Prabhupada then extrapolates it, saying that is universal brotherhood. That not just the human form of life, but everybody and anybody in any form of life, you should consider as your brother. So don't eat them. Don't cause unnecessary suffering to them. A lot of actually Vedic hymns that specifically call upon protection for animals. The verse is not coming to my mind, but Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve bhavantu niramaha, sarve pashyanti, ma kaschid dukha bhav bhave. So it says that sarve bhavanti sukhina, that everybody, that's a prayer that everybody should be happy. Sarve bhavanti sukhina, sarve bhavantu shanti, that everybody, may there be peace on everybody. Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve bhavantu shantira, sarve pashanti, sarve bhadrani pashyantu. That all living entities are taken care of. Ma kaschid dukha bhav bhave. And nobody should be suffering. So this notion of accepting universal brotherhood is intrinsic to the existence of the same quality of soul in all forms of life. Okay, verse 11. Nataman rishir bita saptavadre kritanjali sutvitatam viklavya vachayen udarerta. The living entity in this frightful condition of life, bound by 7 layers of material ingredients, prays with folded hands, appealing to the Lord who has put him in that condition. So we now see the prayers offered by the Jiva. And as you will see, so prayers, I think I'll start from the actual prayers. I'll start from Wednesday. Good to do the verses together. But this verse is an introduction to the prayer. And the interesting thing is, it's a little humorous also, that the prayers by the embryo, they are very, very elevated prayers. So you would think that this is an embryo with barely formed brain, and it's a pre-infant, and they would pray something like, please protect me, or please relieve me from this suffering. No, it doesn't even ask for that. Well, ask for it indirectly, but very, very exalted, philosophically dense, very, very deep prayers by the Jivas. We'll see in the next set of verses. Now, we've all gone through this condition. We've all been in a womb, and does that mean that all of us have prayed in the same way? So Vishwanath Chakravarti says that not every jiva makes these prayers. So Lord Kapila, he qualifies the jiva with the word rishir, that na atmana rishir bhita. So rishir means wise, or one who is able to see the soul. So this is to describe a special kind of jiva. And then Vishwanath Chakravarti, he spends quite some time analyzing the grammar of this verse to extract some philosophical conclusions about who is rendering these prayers. So the point that he makes is that it is unreasonable to expect that these are instructions that are given to the embryo in the womb. So clearly, this is not imperative. This is not something that all the jivas do. So the inference is that those who have worshipped the Lord in the past will pray. Those who have not will not have the realization to pray. So then Vishwanath Chakravarti asks that why is the potential case being used? This is the potential case in Sanskrit grammar, which is imperative, which is saying that the jiva will pray. So how can you say that the jiva will pray? And then he explains that when there is a close relationship between the cause and effect, then the cause is seen in the effect. So those who had prayed in the past should pray in the womb. So this is what the verse is saying, that those who had prayed in the past, those who are devotees, should pray. Now the should can be understood as will pray, because this relationship is very close, that any jiva that has prayed in the past will pray because of purvaras. So it is as good as saying as should pray. Now another point he says is that Lord Kapila is speaking this verse in past tense. So the past tense is being used to indicate that the jivas who had prayed in the past also prayed in the past in the womb. So why is this important? Because this is supporting the Vedic understanding that those who pray do not take birth again. And Vishwanath Chakravarti quotes two verses, one from the Narad Puran, Kamadapi ye Vishnu sakrit pujam parukrvate na tesham baba bandhastu kadachit api jayate. That those who worship Vishnu even once without desire are not subject to bondage and no longer take birth. And then he quotes Lord Ram from the Ramayana Yuddhakand 1833. The same verse is quoted in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Leela 22:34. Sakradeva prapano yassa tavasmiti cha yachate abhayam sarvada tasmai dadamya etad vratam mama. So Lord Ram is saying, I have made a vow that I will give fearlessness to that person, he who surrenders and once says, I am yours. So one can understand that this prayer by the jiva is done in the past and the jiva is now liberated. Otherwise, it would invalidate the statements in the scriptures that are given above. Now, if you put it together, the understanding is that these prayers that are spoken are spoken by jiva who has prior experience of bhakti but has still not perfected it. So based on that prior experience, the jiva shares its realization, just like a jiva that has prior experience of karma will remember the activities of the prior births. So earlier Lord Kapila has said that a special jiva is given vision of the 100 prior births, and here Vishnu Chakravarti says is, there he's talking about the karamkandis, the pious, the materially pious jivas who were attached to karma. So because of their attraction to karma, they get an opportunity to view the karma of their prior 100 lives. And the devotee jiva who's attached to the Lord, he gets an opportunity to once again realize based on the relationship that he has with the Lord. Now, later on, another point that is made is that this particular prayer that we see in the Bhagavatam is the prayer of one jiva, because it is unreasonable to expect, even if the jiva is a devotee, it is unreasonable to expect that all of them will say the same prayer. They may emote similarly, but just like we have so many prayers in the Bhagavatam, we have prayers by Kunti Devi, by Gajendra, by the demigods, but they're specific prayers. An individual is, in a particular instant, reciting that prayer. So similarly, this is a specific prayer spoken by an enlightened jiva, which is being shared in the Bhagavatam. Other jivas may have similar prayers. They may have a similar mood. The last point that is made here is that one may question that if Krishna is promising to protect his devotees, then even if the devotee's devotion is still not perfect, why does he go through this abominable condition that has been described in the previous set of verses, being bitten by worms and suspended and this, etc., etc.? And the answer is that those verses talking about the suffering do not apply to the devotee jivas. So while they're coming in line sequentially, and one would expect that it's the same jiva that's being spoken about, but from this point onwards, the description actually switches focus. The suffering is described of those who have not taken to bhakti. Now, even the devotee jiva goes through the process of taking birth, etc. But and that part is mystical. But for whatever reason, they do not go through that hellish suffering because of Krishna's protection. But they do have and that we'll see, by the mercy of Krishna, they will have the realization to pray to him. Okay, so as I mentioned, these prayers are fairly complicated, and hopefully Wednesday we should be able to complete the prayers. Some of these verses have discussions lasting for, just one verse have discussions lasting for a couple of hours. So we'll try and condense them. We won't spend too much time, but we'll also want to do some justice to them. So let me pause over here, see if there is any comments. Okay, if not, then we'll end here. Thank you. Vanchakalpatarubhayasya kripasindubhya cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Anantakoti Vaishnavinda ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nithai Gaur Premanande. Hari Hari, Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.